All right, cool. Welcome to this demo of React Native. So if you haven't done so already, please install Create React Native app. You can do this by, I lost the screen, but let me just throw something up real quick. Just use npm install g create React Native app. All right, so I already have this installed, so what I'm going to do first is to create an app. So I'm going to call this Flixie Native. You can call it whatever you want as long as you change your commands appropriately. So it's going to go through, run a bunch of scripts, and it's going to spit out a React Native application. This is going to take a while, so in the meantime, let's actually go and take a look at this app while it's building.
One quick question.
Sure.
Are we going to go over kind of what Create React App and Create Native App actually do?
Not
really?
Not until, I mean, we could have some time at the end of the course. I don't know, the packaging stuff.
You could talk about it for hours.
Yeah.
So creating React App, the main thing it does, it sets up, I think the main benefit is it sets up the build pipeline for you. So every time you edit a file, it kind of does like a little compile step for you, makes everything into one. It uses something called Webpack. So it makes all the kind of JavaScript code into one coherent file. That's the big advantage of Create React App. For native, it does a little more. It's actually compiling JavaScript and making an interface with the native. I think that's React Native in general. Create React Native App is more complicated than Create React App. And that Create React Native App, which you'll see in a moment, is built on top of another runtime. So actually the apps you build are apps that run in a different app. If that makes sense. It's called Expo. Later, when you can still release these apps to the App Store, that would like get rid of that step. But the way that the Create React Native App people explain Create React Native App, it's like React Native is Ruby, Create React Native App is Ruby on Rails. So it gives you a little framework on how to use this thing. But the actual details are, if you want to get into them, it's not too boring.
I personally think they're very interesting, but it's a little bit outside of the scope of the course. Like the goal here is to just teach you how to do the actual application stuff. The packaging is like a whole different side of the game. But yeah, in the meantime, let's take a look at app.js. So this is actually basically the only file that Create React Native App spits out. So if you remember back to Create React App, it would spit out like index.html, app.css, index.js, and a few other things. This is the only file that Create React Native App will spit out. And it's just hooking this through to iOS and Android through a bunch of magical things that it does. But this is all you really need to look at first. And this should look pretty familiar to you. So we just have a main app. This will get mounted onto Expo. And the only differences are here. So on the website, you'd probably see something like div or span or something like that. And with these texts, it'd be like P. But because we're dealing with mobile applications, we're going to be using a whole different set of elements. And so let's see if we're done with so you can see this map pretty closely to what the application looks like. This will actually take a while, so while we're doing that, I want to, since we've begun to understand a little bit about how React architecture works, what I'd actually like to do is to go into what we actually want to build and kind of sketch out an architecture before we type a single line of code. This is generally pretty good practice. It helps, it's helpful to think through things before you start building yourself into a corner, really. So I'm using Sketchpad here. We're just going to draw out a few things. So what we're trying to build is very similar to the web-based Flixie. What you'll have is a list of movies. So a big list, big page. And each one of these movies occupies like a little segment. I apologize for my inability to draw straight lines. It'll probably have some kind of little picture here, etc. And then it'll probably have some text. And what we also want to do here is we want to link out every time you click on one of these. Okay? Create a different page that has maybe a bigger picture and then some more detailed text. So what does this look like from a React architecture perspective? So let's think back to what we were doing with a vanilla React app, non-native. What you would have is this large container component, which doesn't draw anything, but it kind of ferries data around to all the different display components, the dumb components, as we were talking about before. A dumb component is basically something that doesn't really have any logic behind it. It just takes in data and then displays it. So what you'll have here is a big container. So let's call it container. And then it's going to have these child components. So the first level, you'll probably want some kind of list for all the movies. All right, let's call this movie list. And then what the container is going to do is it's going to shoot over all the movies to a movie list. So probably something like this. Let's just call it movies. All right, so it's just going to shoot over a bunch of movies to movie lists. And then what movie list is going to do with all of these movies is that it's going to break them up and then fan them out individually to a bunch of different movie card components. Or you can call it by any other name, but what these are components that display just like an individual row, an individual line in the movie list. So let's call this movie card. And what this is doing is it'll send over one movie here and another movie here. So let's call it movie 1. And then movie 2. And then another thing we want to do when we link out to a much larger movie, or sorry, not a larger movie. When we link out to a specific movie, when you click on one of these movie cards, is we want a separate component that kind of deals with that. So let's call it a movie profile. And something will happen here. I don't want to get into specifics right now, but this is actually a little bit weird, a little bit different. We can go over that once we're ready. But as you can see, this is a very rough sketch of what our architecture looks like. You have a container that goes off, it talks to the API, it does all of that stuff, collects the data. It ships over movies into movie list. Movie list then delegates those individually to a bunch of movie cards. And then there's something that happens that allows us to display an individual movie profile. So now that we have a good idea of our architecture, we can go in and start working on our app. Does anybody have any questions so far? I know that was a bit fast, kind of very high level. If anything's confusing, definitely let me know. All right, so let's go ahead. Okay, so let's actually get started, just like we did with our last app, with kind of a little bit of a cheat. Let's go and just grab the raw data from TMDB and just put it into a variable. So the raw data is here, a bunch of raw data. Just going to copy paste it and create a new data.json. Boom. And then in app, we're going to import test data from, what was it, data. And then we're going to hook that into our state.
What's different so far from React Web?
Nothing. Yeah. This is the exact same thing. We're just doing the same thing that we did with the beginning of our React app. So test data dot results. So we get the actual movies. And then here we're going to do console.log this dot state dot movies. But the question is, where does console.log log to? Let's take a look. So this is when you do yarn start in the root directory of your project. It's going to show this page. Try out Android if you're on a PC. If you're iOS emulator if you're on a Mac. I'm going to go with the iOS emulator.
So the iOS simulator is a lot faster than the Android emulator. If you don't have a Mac and you do Android, I actually recommend that you run on a device. So hook up your actual Android phone to your computer with a USB cable. So the emulator is pretty slow.
So what about running on Linux computer? And I want to play it on iPhone.
Oh, there's a QR code actually. So if you download the Expo app, you can.
No, you can't compile iOS code on a non-Apple computer. So you cannot compile a program for an iPhone.
Here's the thing though, doesn't Expo expose?
Expo can support that.
You can't run XP.
It doesn't work at all. Okay. Dang it. Oh, also, kind of a side note, does anybody have a Mac charger that I could borrow?
Yes.
I'm running very low on batteries here. Awesome, thank you very much. Okay. All right, so this is the emulator. As you see, this is what our app looks like, right? So open up app.js to start working on your app. That's exactly what it is here. Open up to typing. Open up app.js to begin working on your app. I changed that. Sweet, it changes. And we did a little console.log action, which is actually going to get displayed in your terminal. So this is where all your console.logs will pop up when you want to debug. All right, so now that we have our data, what we want to do, just like last time, is we want to take this static data and then just display it in a reasonably nice way. If you're using Visual Studio Code, what I recommend is you download or install React Native Snippet. So you do this by Shift Command or Shift Control P, and then install extensions, hit Enter, and then search for React Native Snippet, and then just install that. I already have it installed, so what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do, I have a new file here. I'm going to do RNC, and then hit Tab. Hold on, maybe I need to save it first. So RNC, and then Tab. It creates a huge class for me. So movie list is what I want to call this. And then another one, movie card, RNC, tab, movie card. So these two new components now. 2 new components. Didn't have to type too much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import movielist.js into our main app. And by the way, we're going to use our app as our container. We could split it out. In fact, it's kind of a nice thing to do. But let's not worry about that too much. Alright, so we have movie lists in app.js. And let's just completely replace everything with movie list. Should just say movie list. So, all right, so we've changed it up. What we're going to do with movie list is I'm first going to introduce this concept called a flat list. So let me write it out first, and then see if you can pick up on what it's that is not correct. Flat list. I'm just going to type out a few things and see if you can pick up on what it's doing. All right. Anybody have any guesses as to what this is trying to accomplish?
No idea.
No idea. All right. So if you'll remember back to our React app, what we did usually looks something like this, right? So const movies equals this.props.movies.map movie, and then we create some kind of text component, movie.title, etc., etc., etc. Right? And then we plug that in into our DOM, so we'd have like div and then movies in div. Right? We do something like that. So what flatlist does is it abstracts all of that away. It makes things a bit easier when you want to render. When you want to render nothing. Let's see. Sorry, what's that? I think that should be right. Oh, you know what? All right, here we go. Cool. All right, so we got a bunch of titles here.
So I also want to add one more thing to the flat list discussion. So for those of you who have done mobile development, on iOS you have something called list view. On Android you have something called recycler view. And the reason why these components are important is it also does row recycling. So if you have a list of 1,000 items, and only 10 are on the screen, it only keeps 10 space for 10, and it reuses them in the scroll. So you don't have 1,000 limit memory. That's actually very important. You can implement the same thing using just a regular scroll view. But if you try to scroll it, it will run out. It will be like slow. Scrolling is going to do that very fast. But on the upside, if you have done mobile stuff, remember, you don't want your render function inside that render item function to be slow at all. Because that will hinder scrolling.
All right. So now that we're spitting out a bunch of little text views. We actually want to do something a bit more involved, maybe actually display our movie card. So let's first import movie card here. And let's just make this a bit nicer. So image, as you all know, this is just the base URL for TMDB. So I'm just going to copy paste that, no worries there. And I'm going to just implement a pretty simple view with an image. So I'm going to manually specify the size here. And thing two, the weird thing that actually I personally haven't really figured out about React Native is that you kind of have to specify the exact height and width. There isn't as good of a layout system for images as there is in HTML. So something you just kind of have to deal with at the moment. So image and then text. So words. So we want to use our movie card here, and then we want to pass in the data using this thing. Some of you may have already seen this, may have already used this. This is called destructuring. So what this basically does is it takes movie item dot item, which is an object that looks something like, say like this. So title A, image B, and it destructures it. So it passes it into movie card so that this is essentially like this. Right, so that this is equivalent to this if movie item dot item is this. So just wanted to share a bit of syntax here. So this. Imports. All right. So we're already getting somewhere. Does anybody have any questions so far? All right. Okay. So then let's get into the nitty gritty of things. So this actually looks kind of crappy. It's kind of like stuck up here at the top. All I want to do is I want to pull that down just a little bit. So let's do that. Let's just wrap this in a view. And this style. And actually all we want in style is just a little bit of margin. Okay, so that looks a bit better. And then let's add a little bit of a loading state so that we can pretty this up as we're loading data into our API. So let's delete test data first. Maybe set, let's add a loading state. So false. In movie list, let's add this one section. So this syntax is going to be a bit janky, but you know you can kill me in the code review. Prop stop loading. Loading. Small. Don't do this at home, kids. Alright, cool. Alright, so as you can see, we have a little loading state now that we then pass into movie list. So clear. We pass it in as a prop. So again, all of our data, all of our actual information is stored at the top level, at the container level. We don't store any of that in the at the lower levels. And then let's actually try to load this stuff from the internet. So let's put in our API key, and then let's add a component will mount callback. So this is one of several standard callbacks. Component will mount can't quite remember what it's called. It's basically when the component is going to appear, like right before it appears on the screen. Generally a good place to be loading data, I would say. All right, so we want to set state. We're going to start loading now. All right, so let's actually just run this here and see what it looks like. All right, cool. So it's just loading. Yeah, good stuff. Class over. So one thing about this this set state is that it's asynchronous, and so if we just did set state and then did our fetch here, and then used a bunch of promises to then set state to loading false here, there is the possibility that it would clobber each other. Generally, just not a good thing to do. So what we're going to do here is to use the second argument for set state, which is a callback that happens after state is done setting. So this is going to go set state, and then after it's done doing that, it'll go run this callback. And in this callback is where we're going to go fetch stuff. So
so basically when you call this .set state, it's not guaranteed to immediately change the state. So if you have a complicated app, you have a lot of people change the state at once. So React will wait. This is true on both on native and web. React will actually wait and try to combine lots of different state updates in the same call. So when it's done doing that, it will run the actual callback. So in week 1, I didn't take care of that detail, but June is much better than I am.
Okay, so this is the. So again, what we're doing here is we're going off to the API, we're fetching. We get back this data, which we then have to parse using data.json. And after we do that, we're going to go actually set the state using this function here, loading equals false. I just want to make an extra comment here, which is that I'm using the promises syntax. I personally like the syntax better. It shows like the chaining effect a bit more clearly than the magic of async await. Again, I also think that async await is going to be the future. Just do what you feel is right.
No hard feelings.
Yeah, no hard feelings, exactly.
That's good to. I mean, we also we're encouraging this to show you that like you might have to read code that's written this way too. So it's good for you to at least be exposed to the syntax. So it's nothing to be scared of. Oh, it's a little scarier looking than
It is, yeah, it is that. I'm also adding this this like little middle tier between this. This just sleeps for 2,000 milliseconds. Yeah, not a lot to talk about here. I just wanted to set this here so that we can actually see the loading states, because things tend to load a little bit too clearly.
You need an arrow and like.
Yeah, good call. Thank you, Charles.
That's the same thing as this sleep last time. It's slightly different.
There we go. So waited 2,000 milliseconds and then displayed real data. Look at this, real data. Cool. This is so far this is pretty good. We're getting real data, but we want to maybe see more data. And what we want to implement is some kind of way of refreshing. So what Flatlist also has, one of its many wonderful, wonderful features, is that it has, let's see, is that it has an on refresh callback. And let's see, refreshing. So let's just do an alert here and see what happens. And I think we'll also see what happens when we do an alert on the simulator. So you can pull a refresh and then it runs this callback.
Wow.
So that's kind of cool. You can maybe build something with this. Let's go back to our container component and try to abstract some of this stuff out. So let's just first do it so that we can kind of replicate the same functionality we had before. So let's fetch with page here, and then just copy all of this. So this that set state. Let's add a little thing for page here. And if you remember from the TMDB documentation, it accepts page as a parameter. Should do the right thing. Let's see here. One here. Make sure that's not really. Actually, I'm jumping the gun a little bit. Let's go ahead and just call this. And just for safety's sake, let's do this little trick here. Just to make sure this refers to the right this. All right, cool. All right, let's do it. Let's see if this works. Loading. Yep. Where's the data? All right, so it's doing the same thing. So in addition to our component will mount, what we want to do is to implement a load more function. And so what this load more does is it just goes and increments the page and then fetches data from there and puts it into state. So we want to calculate a new page. Let's specify a page state in state. And one thing to note about state here, and this is one thing I mentioned in the chat, is that it's very ideal if you just put all the things that your state is potentially going to set in here. So make sure you provide some default values, not just because it's good to have, but also to provide your readers with more documentation. So our new page, page plus one. This dot set state, page, new page, and after we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and fetch with page. This new page. All right. We got load more. Let's safety this up. And then, instead of this, let's pass this load more function down into our movie list. And call it from here. Stuff. Load more. Let's make sure I get this right. Yep. Okay, so let's see. Loading. And then it replaces it with a new set of movies every time you do this.
The flash list has any functions that happen to implement the
Infinite
list?
scroll?
Yeah.
Very good observation. We're just getting to that. So this is kind of what we want, but not at all what we want. We don't want to pull to refresh. What we actually want is to keep scrolling infinitely and just keep pulling more data as that goes. So what flatlist also provides is this other function called on and reached. So let's call this. See what it does. Oh, wow, geez. Kind of popped off early there. that's not exactly what we want, so let's actually go through and set this other parameter. So on end reach threshold. And this number is the percentage from the end that you have to get to for this callback to be called. So we're going to set it to 5%. And when we do that, it'll be a much more reasonable alert. Yeah, there we go. Right, so that's basically the end. Let's see. You can actually set this higher so that you don't quite get that effect. So you're always scrolling, and then it'll load like really soon, like maybe 50% through. So you get this completely smooth scroll. The reason I'm implementing this 5% is just so that we can actually see when it's loading and when it's not. Cool. So let's actually hook this through. All we have to do here, if we already have it, is .props.load more. And let's actually get a little fancy here. There's this other attribute called listFooter component, which just puts a little UI element at the bottom of the list whenever it is loading. So let's give it a style. Activity indicator. All right, let's try this out. So let's load from. Huh? Yeah. Oh, actually, you know what we should do? We should get rid of this whole thing. Scroll, 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 scroll. Whoa, what's going on? It's doing some weird stuff here. This is actually because we haven't appropriately adjusted our data. So what we want to do here is this.state.movies.concat JSON.results. This actually may end up doing some bad stuff because the paging isn't necessarily consistent on TMDB. So there might be duplicates in JSON.results when it gets appended to this.state.movies. And you'll see this. If it becomes a problem, we can deal with it. But as for now, let's just pretend that it works. Just wanted to call that out. So load, and then yeah, there we go. Let's see what happens. So Blade Runner. Let's just ignore this for the moment. Actually, you know what? Let's deal with this problem. Let's not procrastinate. That's setting a very bad example here. All right, let's see.
So all of these settings, all that flat file stuff, will work both on iOS and Android, everything?
Yeah.
So what I'm just doing here, this is just a little code finagling. I'm creating a set of our existing movies and then filtering the JSON.results so that I'm only getting new movies. A little hack. Results equal to this.state.movies.concat. All right, so this is the set of movies that exists. This is the results filtered so that it's all movies that aren't in this set. And then so we get our new results when we concat this plus set to our existing state and we just plug it in.
What is the green dot?
Which one? Oh, that's another example of destructuring. So this is an array, and I'm basically saying, so let's make this clear. This dot state dot movies. Even after I map it, it's going to be right. So it's mapped. Yada yada. It's going to be like a bunch of IDs, and then I want to shove it into this list. So I'm destructuring it. So I'm destructuring it into that list, which I can then pass into this set. There's just a little bit of finagling around syntax. Yeah. Destructuring is very useful. It makes your code look a lot nicer. All right. Where was I? So hopefully this should work. It's this new iPhone X interface. It's too creative. Too much creativity. Cool. Yeah, deduped. Yay. All right, so we've actually gotten pretty far. Does anyone have any questions before we dive into the final section? All right, cool. Let's do it. So we have all of this. The one thing we want to do is to link out each of these individual cards when we click it to a profile page. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take one of these cards, and wrap it in this touchable highlight. Touchable highlight is basically like an A, like this. But obviously works differently because it's mobile. Charles, do you have any words on touchable highlight?
There's a few different versions of touchable. There's touchable highlight, touchable opacity, and that's just different ways that the button reacts when you press it. Highlight means when you press it, the whole thing will get brighter. So that's a very standard thing for buttons. Yeah, focus.
Cool. Charles, should we take a break?
Yeah, we take a 5-minute break.
Okay. Yeah. So
The next part's a little bit hard.
Yeah. Let things sink in first.
So one follow-up question to Charles to create the app. Do people create production-ready apps with it, or is it just for development?
On web, I would say it's very production ready, probably.
Yeah.
On native, you can.
You can. There's what's the word? Eject. Yeah. So you can do all of your stuff, and then there's this command to eject your app, and then from there you're just working with the regular React Native app.
I think creating an app is fine for a while. The main problem is it's hard to include third-party libraries that can be native code. So if you do that, you have to do this thing called injection. It's okay. My favorite thing about why it's good production is that it comes in with hot code upload built in. So you release your app to the App Store via create React.
Oh yeah.
If you change the code and re-push it,